Hey there. Good morning. This is Leanne with Marketing. Today, I am joined by James Furbush. He is an amazing person that has so much experience, and I'm just going to let you explain a little bit more about your background to kind of lead us into this conversation about how creating trust is how you get real impact in your marketing strategies. James, tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh my gosh, Leanne, thanks so much for having me on the show. Huge fan, so honored to be here. Um, yeah, so I am the vice president of marketing for a company called Access One. We are in the healthcare patient payment space. So U.S. healthcare industry only. And then sort of within the healthcare, we sell to like the financial side of the house for the teams, billing teams who are collecting payments from patients. I've been with Access One for probably about 3 years now, and I was at a little startup that Access One acquired for about a year before that. I've spent most of my marketing career in healthcare marketing. I started probably about 10 years ago by now, 11 years, 10 years, at a company called Athena Health, which here in the Boston area. And Athena Health, for those who probably aren't too familiar with like the health tech world, I would describe them as they're like the HubSpot of health tech. I think they're just a very large, progressive kind of marketing company. So it was really just a fantastic, place to kind of cut my chops and start my marketing career. Feel kind of blessed to have done that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and part of the reason why I specifically asked you is because I think you have a very unique position in understanding that these highly regulated like arenas that still require a certain touch that is it's sophisticated, we'll call it, but it's educational almost. So to that end, if you could tell me like a little bit about a strategy or kind of a methodology or mindset that you have that you're like, look, you guys, you have to do it like this. If you're not doing it like this, you're missing the boat. Could you tell us a little bit about that kind of like soapbox kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, so for us, so to kind of just to level set, so like for the space that we're in, and actually like a lot of deals, like the sales cycle in sort of healthcare, they are long and and long might be like generous. I would say it's not uncommon for a sales cycle in our space to be 18 months on average. 12 months on the short end, and they can be anywhere up to 24, 2 years, 2 years long. So if you think about from that perspective, it requires a lot of touches, a lot of accounts come and go. It's hot 1 minute, all of a sudden, then they go quiet for 3, 4, 5 months. And so for me, like I learned, just even at Athena now at Access One, it just requires a lot of content, a lot of, to your point, like trust building, a lot of providing education, because healthcare is always changing, right? It's like a complex environment. There's like a lot of like rules and regulations that are changing all the time, like especially in the billing space and whatever. And so, you have to be able to kind of bring value and information to your buyers, in a way that is like not pushy, and in a way that is like frankly, a lot of what we do is from the perspective of just like building long-term relationships. So I think for me, I've always sort of approached, I always say, like, if I do my job well, what we're doing is, also certainly helping sales, but like building relationships at scale, I think is just sort of the best way that I can think about my job. Like we are in a relationship business, even within healthcare. Um, and so the best thing that I can do is sort of help our team sort of build those relationships with a lot of people at scale. Whereas sales might be one to one, but I'm sort of doing it in a way that I can kind of reach just a lot more people.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of really great points to that. Is that one, the space is always changing. And part of that is kind of that like waterfall effect, right? So if there's something new that came out about like a certain health need, then not only do the practitioners and the customer facing staff need to understand that, they need to understand how then to bill for it, and then that impacts your systems. And also then the larger organization needs to have methodology and rules in place for how they handle that process. And so going dark for a couple months is a very actually reasonable thing while they just figure out how to accommodate this new thing that's changed. And it's not about you. And I think that having that patience and having that North Star of how do we build that one-to-one value is really the correct thing to do. And now I struggle always with saying, "Oh no, you should never build trust. You should always be building trust." But specifically, it's a very complex and multi-layered type of business motion. Um,
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's not uncommon to have. I mean, we joke that there are like buying committees to evaluate the buying committee
oh yeah.
in our space. But to give you an example of like the complexity in that sort of deal making space that we have, it's if you are selling to an academic health system, which a lot of just traditionally in our space, the academic medical center or health system, it's a health system tied to a state university. So it's not uncommon that you have, say, you'll be selling to the University of Michigan Health, and um, uh, but so you have like the buyer within in that health system, but then there also might be like a committee tied to the academic institution that has oversight over the health system. And then to take it one step further, there also might be like a government, like a board of regents, or like someone tied to the state government that has oversight over the university, that has oversight over the health system, right? So it's you're not just selling to the health system, you're like navigating the tricky politics of like the academic institution and the government, for instance. And so like that's when you're building relationships, right? It's like for us, you've got to be able to kind of figure out like, okay, who's the buying committee? What's the committee that's influencing the buying committee? How do we influence that and make sure that there are no surprises when it gets to them? So yeah, it's incredibly complex. I sort of forget the question that you asked now,
No,
but I
this
think
is
that kind
great.
of talks about how when we go to market, it's like we are constantly thinking about that. It's almost like how do we build trust and also make sure that like we're not gonna step on any unforeseen landmines, for lack of a better way to express it, within the deal cycle. So yeah, it's constantly um, thinking about earning trust and keeping trust is enormously important for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to kind of like paraphrase and apply what I heard was just that, for very reasonably so, and I can think of this firsthand. Like I live in the LA area. UCLA Health is
Yep.
an HMO. It is a residency teaching hospital. It has multiple branches with multiple offices, hospitals, specialists. if you think of a medical specialist, they have a specializing board certified group. So that's another agency entity. And so just the way to answer problems for all of these is a very delicate tightrope dance of content, because you have to make sure that precisely how you're using that word or that phrase in all of its significance or implications is accurate and doesn't contradict something that you said something else unknowingly,
Oh my
and
gosh,
answers
yeah.
all of these needs for all of these people. Because not only are the systems complex, but the problems that they solve are complex, because the human body is one of the most complicated things that there is. I'm sorry, but it just is. It's complicated AF.
Well, and you know, I'd hazard to guess that if you are selling in the MarTech space, when you are selling, it's ultimately like not life and death.
Right, right.
Um, and in our space, it very much is. And I can remember a conversation we had with a potential buyer, and it was I forget what the health system was. Um, and I remember, and I will never forget this. So they were like, "Look, when we think about like buying new technology or working with new vendors or things like that, we very much think about um, the cost, not just like the actual cost, like what it's going to cost us to like say work with a company like Access One or whatever. But we think about those dollars in terms of if we spend on Access One, that means it needs to like have an ROI, because if it doesn't, that's you know thousands of dollars that we are not spending on cancer care at our health system. That is money we are not spending on patient care and saving lives and things like that. And so I think about that so much, about how, um, like for us, it's like, you think about like competitively selling. It's like we're not just selling against like other competitors, like we're selling against a healthcare system's decision to like invest in us versus potentially more cancer care or more heart surgeries or things like that. So like for us, like in some ways, like it is life or death. And it is for the patient, like bodies are complex, absolutely, like care is complex, things like that. But at the same time, patient billing is like very complex. You think about like they do the service and then it goes to the insurance, and the insurance pays for whatever, and then they get a bill, they get an explanation of benefits. And I think so much of like for patients, like educating them on like what they owe for their care is enormously difficult for health systems. And frankly, for patients too, it's like they're faced with, in some ways, it's like if I have to pay for this healthcare bill and I owe thousands of dollars, like that's now like food I'm not putting on the table for my family. And like that's another complex layer that like our buyers and our customers are dealing with, which is like patients owe money, but also at the expense of like what else they may be dealing with on a monthly budget basis. Because like we've done studies where it's like patients can't afford more than like $500, like healthcare bills. They can't afford a bill more than $500. And so anytime you're asking for a patient to pay more than $500, it opens up a whole new complex set of things that like that health system has to be prepared for to like help support that patient. So yeah, I mean, it's enormously complex. And I think it's just like, I think that's the one thing that I love about healthcare marketing and healthcare content in general, is that like anytime you peel back like one layer of the onion, you're like, okay, great. Like we're doing content for this persona and this buyer and things like that. It's also like, but could we be helping our customers doing better educational content, when it comes to patient payments? Like, can we be helping, how do we write for the person using our product versus a C-suite versus the physician who's looking to just get paid for the services they provide. There are just like so many angles. And I think for me, it's like this sort of unsolvable puzzle that I just like absolutely get excited about.
Yeah, it's definitely I'm really glad that you brought up that, like, one-to-one impact of the patient, because that is definitely an influencer in how people, whether or not they go to get healthcare in the first place, right? Um, and then, the complexities from there, because there is definitely a lot to think about in this country. And then, to kind of follow up that is what happens when, there's an entire process of, this was denied, or this wasn't covered, or pre-authorization, or, it's just it's a behemoth. Like, it's not there's layers to it. And so one of the things that you said last, I just want to kind of like recenter us, is
Yeah,
about that relationship building, the content for this persona. Let's talk more about that.
sure. Yeah. So for me, so the way that I sort of think about it is, we have at a very practical level. So we have a couple of different like interview based podcast shows that we do. Um, and I sort of always think about it in sort of planning those shows. You know, I'll use like a bad sports analogy to get my point across, but it's like I sort of think about, if you are doing content for say a football team, right? It's like the content if you were selling to like just say an NFL football team, it's like the content that you would make for that owner of the team is going to be very different than the content you make for the coaching staff, and it's going to be very different than the content you make for the players on the field. And so I sort of come about it, sort of that sort of how I approach our own content and how we do that, which is like, okay, we need general awareness content. So let's create a show that's going to be aimed at the C suite and like, what is that show going to be? Okay. If the coaching team is the buyer and that's the person kind of who ultimately we want to reach, what is the content that's going to appeal to them? And then, we don't do a ton of like, say, content for the players, but like, we could very much do, um, for instance, like thinking about like say influencer content or something like that, where if we're doing stuff for the patients, we might have a very different content approach for that. So for us right now, yeah, we have two main shows. One that is just for the buyer, so we sell to. It's a very wonky title, but we sell to. It's called Revenue Cycle Management, RCM. So revenue cycle, like the vice president of revenue cycle, that is our core buyer and ICP. And so we have a show just for them where we are only inviting like that persona on to our podcast to do interviews. When we looked at the sort of market space and things that were, the content that they're consuming and what's available, we recognized that there was a hole in the market for like professional development content. So how do you, and there was almost really nothing, right? Of like, if you're a manager, how do you get to be a VP? How do you develop your career to sort of get to that level? There was kind of just this like hole. And so we kind of created a show that is very much like professional development based. So we try to interview like directors and VPs about what they've learned, to sort of share that knowledge with the sort of entry level and manager professional to help them kind of level up their game and get where they want to go. So that's like one bucket. Then the other one that we did is when we think about kind of our product and where we sit in the market, we are in the patient financial experience space, really, financial, but it's sort of like the patient experience. And so what we decided to do is we have sort of a very broad based show about the patient experience in healthcare, like the changing experience. And so that is sort of our show where we just invite, you know, it's like whoever wants to come on, we'll invite them on. And it's really sort of like it could be financial experience, it could be clinical experience, operational, and we just have guests come on to talk about what are the things that they're doing to sort of up level and change the patient experience at their practice, at their medical group or hospital and health system. Um, and if we go down market to sort of the patients, you know, we may have a different approach for them if we end up doing a show aimed at sort of patients. But for now, we're sort of focused on those two main shows and kind of reaching, you know, building relationships first and foremost with our buyer, but then sort of the broader healthcare conversation as well.
Yeah. And I love that you called out that gap in the professional development space because from what I've observed from the people that I did undergrad with is that you do your undergrad, you are guaranteed that you have to do some sort of master's degree, whether it's a doctorate degree in the actual field, the healthcare field, or it's an MPH, or it's a MPH MBA. Either way, you are almost always required to have some extra beyond a bachelor's higher education. And then you're just kind of dropped off a cliff. You're like, oh, well, everyone's so smart, everyone's so educated. Ta-da, go for it. Just work
Yeah,
really hard. And there's no blueprint or roadmap really given to them,
yeah. Well, and so in our space too,
especially like a
yes,
CFO of a hospital has to have an MBA almost.
CFO of a hospital, absolutely. But so the revenue cycle space is like really interesting because actually, like, there are a lot of different departments that sort of roll up under that umbrella that you wouldn't actually necessarily think about. So on one hand, you have typically they're called patient access teams, and those are for people outside the industry who are not in the weeds like I am. Like, patient access are your typical like front desk. They're the people who check the patient in, who do the scheduling, who check insurance cards, things like that. Those are revenue cycle professionals. And oftentimes those roles, patient access in particular at hospitals and health systems, it's very much viewed as like entry level. You oftentimes don't necessarily need a college degree to get one of those jobs. But oftentimes for those revenue cycle professionals, it's sort of like, okay, well, if you want to advance your career, like, how do you advance through the professional access ladders up to, you know, wider departments, you know? But then you've got sort of the revenue cycle where they are dealing with the insurance companies and doing billing and things like that. And then there's like sort of the back end, which is like collecting from patients and things like that. And so like all of these different departments kind of all roll up into the umbrella. And so for me, like, there are actually like a lot of revenue cycle professionals, yes, who are higher up and have MBAs and you know, MPHs and advanced degrees and things like that. But there's actually like a lot of people in our space that don't.
Yeah.
They're just like, you know, out of high school, or maybe they have a bachelor's degree, but, you know, no advanced education and things like that. And so for me, it's like I really want to kind of create a show that works for a lot of those people who are out there thinking about like, okay, like, now I'm in this space. And the other thing too is like people don't necessarily go to college thinking like, gosh, I want to be a revenue cycle professional. Like, it's not
Yeah.
exactly like, and this is not to
It's just an unknown niche, right?
it's an
Like,
unknown niche, right?
yeah.
And so I think a lot of people then find themselves in this space and they're like, okay, this is interesting. I can make a career out of sort of this like revenue cycle thing, but now how do I actually make a career out of it? And so I think my show is like, okay, well, let's talk to people who have made a career out of it. Like, let's talk to them and find out like how they've done it and share that with everyone, in order to help whoever out there kind of make sense of like this profession that they found themselves in that maybe they weren't expecting themselves to. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a really interesting approach, especially because a lot of the content out there. I think for me, it's a very differentiated content approach that we're doing. We're trying to be helpful to a wide swath of the industry, and we're trying to do it in a way that's different than just like, if you look at all the trade content that's out there and the different stuff, it's not what we're doing. So we're just taking a very different approach. And I think it's working. The reception has been pretty good so far. I think people have been very excited when we kind of invite guests on. They're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe this doesn't exist! Like, thank you for doing this." So I think the reception has been great so far.
Yeah, that's incredibly rewarding. And yes, I am so glad that you pointed out once again that like there is an entire infrastructure of people from various levels of like formal or informal education that, our entire system relies on those firsthand people. And they are of immense
100%,
value.
one hundred
And
percent.
so when I remember kind of looking through things and kind of picking directions is that was, where's the red tape? Where is that line of, what are these, paper credentials that I have to have in order to do X, Y, and Z? What's that look like? And, I, it's not clear in a lot of places. And
Yeah.
especially as it gets more complex, it's even less clear. So any insights into that, I think is just social good, honestly. Um,
Yeah, and it's like you look at these people and that's like they are to me like kind of these unsung heroes in the healthcare system. I mean, if you look at um, like getting paid, a health system getting paid from either a patient or an insurance company is like enormously complex. And it's like one little mistake, you enter the insurance card wrong, you enter a date of birth wrong. Um, the amount that these people have to do and do right 100% of the time, um, it's really kind of incredible what they do in order to kind of help a health system stay afloat, because like margins are hard, and so they work to do is very valuable. And yeah, I just have like the utmost respect as I've kind of done this kind of show and leaned into the content more. It's like just the utmost respect for who they are and what they do within the U.S. healthcare system.
well, and I'm gonna kind of bring this back to marketing because we can marvel at them on many levels, but from a
Yeah,
from a marketing perspective, is that or any like just professional perspective is that sometimes we get so stuck in our day-to-day like job and tasks and activities that we kind of look over at a different department. We're like, what do you have to do? And we just don't know because we're stuck in our tasks. And so getting a face and a story and a person that you're probably gonna like because you're having a conversation. So it just builds that affinity with them from from the marketing standpoint is it just helps enrich like the relationship so dramatically. Um and I think that that's a very vital step to building trust is caring enough to do that.
yeah, and I think for us, um, it's very non-salesy, right? So I think look, the podcast game, at least in like the Martech space, is certainly like everybody does it.
Yeah.
And so you almost start to see now companies like, well, we can't do like interview podcasts, you should do whatever. Our space, it's not, but for me it's like we're not trying to sell them. So there are some times where um, I even forget to like even tell them about like Access One, like who we are as a company. And someone will be like, oh, did you tell that person? That's a great guest, did you tell them about Access One? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I completely forgot, because it's not about us, it's about them. um, but I do think like you build those relationships and like earn that trust, and it gives you the opportunity now, um, because we are not asking anything of them. We're not like, hey, this is not contingent upon you talking to sales, and this is not contingent upon you taking a demo request or doing a demo. This is not contingent. We're not asking anything of you. this is really just about you to put you on a pedestal. But ultimately, it does allow you to build that trust so that if you do want to make an ask, hey, do you want to be on a webinar? Do you want to do something else with us? You can kind of continue to do that. And eventually, if it does, hey, if you ever need something like what we do, like happy to make an intro. Um, but yeah, I think making it about them like absolutely builds trust and allows us to sort of get a seat at the table with them, even when maybe they don't have the time or don't necessarily want to. I think making it about them 100%. Like I will never. I think like I would never want to sort of breach that trust. Like once you've earned it, it's like I don't want to do anything to like actually uh, ruin that with that person. And sometimes like that sales handoff or the making it about Access One or our company, like absolutely can kind of like ruin that trust. So I'm like
Oh, yeah.
very cognizant of that.
Yeah, it's just if you say just one sentence that feels like salesy, then they think all of this was just a charade.
Yes,
And
100%.
and it feels so bad. And I know that in the past I've said a phrase that like feels salesy to other people and I'm like, "Oh man, I that was not my intention."
Yeah,
And it just ruins everything. Because the thing about relationships is they require caring. Like it requires that you actually care about them as a
genuinely
human.
care. Yeah.
It shouldn't be like rocket science at this point, but sometimes people get so caught up in the sales cycle and the this quarter's goals and this thing that they forget that you have to have relationships. And one of the things is the I know a guy thing, right? The I know a guy thing is great because, maybe they're having lunch with their cohort of other people that are in a similar role. And they're like, oh man, we have to start this request for proposals, blah, blah, blah. And then the person that you have a relationship with might be like, oh, hey, I know a guy. Let me introduce you. Right. And
Yeah.
and the only reason why they would even think to do that is because of the reputation and the way that you treated them as a person. No one's gonna, I know a guy if you're out there making people feel used or transactioned.
No, I 100%. I mean, I think that's the tricky dance that I think we
Yeah.
do in marketing
Yeah.
oftentimes, right? Because look, I'm under no illusions that,
It's still a business.
it's still a business, like new logo, new business, right? Getting prospects into the pipeline, getting demos and meetings for sales. Like I'm under no illusion that that's like the name of the game. Um, but I've seen it work when you give and give and give and you treat that sort of relationship like it's an actual relationship where you're giving with no expectation in return. Um, yeah, eventually people do they do come to talk to you. Like we've had previous guests from the podcast have reached out and been like, hey, we're evaluating this company. I don't actually know it. Like, would you talk to us? Like, can we talk about Access One, whether that leads to new business or not, like it does open doors. And eventually, when you want to ask from them, like I do think if they get into a buying cycle, like ultimately the goal is you want to be one of the three companies that they are considering. And so, yeah, I think if you do it well, you can absolutely be one of the three companies when I know a guy, comes up and it's like, hey, we're gonna buy, we're in the buying cycle. Like, oh, I know a guy. Like, let's reach out to kind of this company and get an intro. I absolutely believe that that does happen, especially like in healthcare in our space where it's so relationship driven. Yeah,
And it's not just relationship driven, it's reputation driven, right? Because
right.
there's there's a lot of patient privacy, but there is a lot of, hey, this group, don't do it. Like, there's a lot of like, just there's a lot of medical conferences. There's a lot of like infrastructure conferences. There's a lot of higher ed, like there's so many conferences. And there's very much relationship reputation driven.
Well,
And for good reason.
in our space too, it's like one of our biggest channels that works, frankly, is um,
Events.
well, not event. Well, events certainly work well, but like customer employees at customers who go on to other organizations. Almost a lot of our, it's like, hey, I was at such and such. I'm now at this health system, like running the rev cycle. Like, let's talk, you know. And so they're like, for us, I think when you talk about brand and you talk about that reputation, right? That's the biggest sign, is like when someone who uses you at one place and moves on and gets promoted to take a job at another health system, when you're one of their first calls to be like, oh, they don't have anything, like we got to get access one in place. I mean, that's like the biggest sign of, as a company, as an entire organization, like we are doing the right things, from marketing to customer success to the product team to leadership. That's proof that, like, as a company, we are doing all the right things to sort of create and maintain that reputation as well. Because it's so easy. Like, look, what we do, I think what we do as a company is really great and it's differentiated. But I'm also under no illusions that like there aren't 10 other versions of us out there, and that former customer could go talk to any one of those other customers. But they, you know, the fact that they kind of want to still talk to us is I think just indicative of that sort of reputation and brand building that we do here.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, and I think that that's definitely common across almost all of like the like modern marketing things, is that if you're selling B2B, is that you do want to have that champion that brings you from place to place to place. And I can think of a few platforms that are maybe a little bit less technical, but like any place that's hiring me to do one thing, I would for sure be like, hey, you know, actually this vendor that you're using, I've used that one in the past and it is yucky. We'll just call you we'll call it yucky. That one's yucky. Use this one. It's a lot better. And and then they use it and they're like, "Oh, wow, it's amazing." And you're like, "Yeah, I told you so." And then, you know, it's a thing.
Yeah,
Um or, you know, if you take on a legacy platform, like you're new to a role and you take on a legacy platform and it is the yucky one, like, whew, I will warn people high and low never to use X, Y, and Z. And you cannot change my mind.
yeah.
That's just that's hard. That's
Well,
hard.
and I think too, like, you know, people have their preferences for like what works well. If it's like, no, we're getting really good results with
It's about results.
whatever, it's
Yeah.
like, and then you're using this other system and you're like, man, this is terrible to use and the results aren't there. It's like, no, when, as soon as we can change, like we will change and bring on the one that will work for us. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was one that I was vehemently against, and when I finally was like, let's just drop them for 60 days and see what happens. And then we dropped them and no change in revenue. I was like, we're going to reduce our customer acquisition cost by 50% now by doing these strategies and leaving that one out. And it worked. It worked immensely. It
Yeah.
just skyrocketed our results. So it's about the results, but it's also the interactions. It's about those, you know, the reputation and this all the layers that you mentioned. Um so I usually ask about disclaimers, but I feel like we've been pretty clear about like what I'm saying is this and not that.
Yeah.
Um but I kind of want to think about the future. So
Sure.
where do you think, not just like this space, but maybe this space. Like, where do you think the future is? Do you think that's where it should go? What are some things that are on your radar about like 2025, 2026, and onward about this space?
Yeah. I think for me, like the big things that I'm still trying to, I think, fully wrap my head around, and I'll confess that I, you know, am not, you know, I think with anything in marketing, sometimes you're like, oh, this is, I'm fully out of my depth here. But I think certainly like AI, as far as like content creation goes. I mean, I've seen some stuff from people out there, as far as creating images, creating video, creating avatars of yourself that you can then put a script in, um, and create content from. Taking, putting a link into a video thing and getting 10 YouTube shorts at a push of a button. I think there's just like a lot out there where, I think anyone who is creating content, like when I started at Athena Health, we were we had like a 7-person video team and a 5-person content team, just writers. And right, like we had inordinate amounts of like manual, like, you know power behind kind of that content creation engine. um and I think that where it's going in the future is you're going to have like, can you be a 1-person marketing team, a 2-person market, like with the full power of being able to create creative videos and ads and content and things like that, very effortlessly through, some of these tools. I think that's going to be a big thing where, I think AI is just, teams are going to be a lot more efficient. The teams that can leverage that. So that's like one thing that I'm looking at, and trying to honestly like wrap my head around more, because it's like, I came up in the world of like writing for newspapers and like interviewing people, and I think the fundamentals are not going to necessarily go away, but I do think, some of this stuff is just, you see and you're just like, holy shit, like this is, you can, the stuff you can create, it's like people are going to be able to create like full blown like movies that are look as good as whatever, just by typing in a script, to a program. So that's one. The other one I think certainly is like influencer marketing, which, I don't know if it's like influencer marketing or if it's just like more, sort of like creator led content, which hasn't necessarily, I think a lot of people talk about like with B2B, like, is it going to happen? Is it happening? Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing? But what I will say is that like, it's not anything new, honestly. Like at Athena Health 10 years ago, we had, a full blown, what I would describe as like influencer program, where we had customers and doctors and different people like heavily involved in creating content and lobbying state government and things like that. Getting to be speakers at events and like slyly promoting Athena Health versus, things like that. So like the influencer kind of thing isn't necessarily new. I think smart companies have been doing it for a very long time. But I do think the tools out there for many, many people to, uh, leverage, across LinkedIn or different programs, TikTok or Instagram, whatever it is, I think is sort of out there. And I think I'd be following that, because I do think like sort of the kind of the thing, like the content that's happening like on YouTube and some of these different platforms. I don't think it's necessarily like fully, got baked into B2B yet. But I think it certainly will. I think it's only kind of a matter of time before, it should be part of your strategy. So I think those are kind of the two things that I'm sort of looking at. Whether that happens now or this year or next year is already happening, I think people should definitely not sleep on those.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a lot of ways it can go. There's a lot of ways it could all go. But as far as like somebody just putting in a script and then having an avatar and things like that, I'm curious how that's going to play out. It does raise some alarm bells for me in some
Oh,
instances.
no,
Like,
I mean 100%. Like if you're not also worried about like, so I mean, part of it is not just thinking about how you can leverage it, but then thinking about like what are the and it's not like a Skynet thing, but like those sort of ramifications. But I think that there's like, for me, it's like the biggest like skill, if you think about like, is being able to figure out like, is this a doctored video? Is this like a legitimate thing versus a not? I don't know. That is the thing that scares me the most, is like, you know, that,
Yeah.
I don't know, like the fakeness. And then the other thing is sort of like the AI slop, where it's all just like shitty derivative content. And then it's just, all of it is just all noise, and there's no signal and there's no value, because it's just like everyone is just flooding the market with shitty videos and shitty content, and like just terrible stuff. I think is definitely something that should be on everyone's mind.
Yeah. And I feel like we could talk about this forever. Because
Oh,
also in your space, like you have to think about the consequences of what happens if you put out an actual video and then someone uses the YouTube link to make a deep fake with it, right? So there's just like there's a lot of
yeah,
ramifications and things that we all need to have some very serious conversations about in consideration. Um,
yeah, and like it doesn't impact us a ton, but like, I mean, you already see it like as it sort of has percolated down into like the wellness space, where it's like
oh, there's so much that's always been garbage. It's always
it's like
been snake
it's
oil.
such snake oil garbage. And now you can't even get like it, they're just drowning out like legitimate medical advice for people. And so that is, yeah, like I worry about that a lot as well. Certainly, like the lack or the prevalence of bad information superseding the good information out there.
I mean, to be fair, I remember infomercials selling fat loss pills. So I remember that this has been a trend
Yeah,
that was coming.
I mean,
This is part of human nature, is that get quick results thing. But once again, I don't want us to hammer too much on that because
I definitely own a bunch of ShamWows from some
but
infomercials.
ShamWows were useful.
Yeah, ShamWows are
ShamWows weren't
useful.
gonna kill you. Fen
That's
was.
true. Sure,
Um,
that's fair.
all right, so let's kind of make this lighthearted or deep, however we want to take it. Behind the
Yeah,
curtain, what is a question someone should ask you but they don't? All right, I'm gonna preface this a little bit. So some people take this as like everybody asks me about Pinterest, but they really need to ask me about having a content strategy. Or sometimes it's about something in your background. One person was like, "Man, I really just want to talk about how much I love to play guitar," because they had guitars.
yeah,
So however you want to take this, it's all you. What is a question someone should ask you, but they don't?
man. I, I don't. It's such a good question, and I'm struggling to whether to do this like personally or professionally, and so I will say a question that people should ask that don't is, and I'll do it personally, and it's what is it that you love about running? So for me, uh, I am a runner, horribly addicted to it. And it's kind of the thing that I do. Kind of, I start my day every morning. It's the thing that like clears my head, sets me up for success, etc. And what I would say is that my answer, the thing that I love about running is that it's sort of this like everyday, it's this sort of, you can never get really good at it. Um, and I think that there's something about like doing hard things um, over like a long sustained period of time. I think about this because I think actually, if I could, not to go like LinkedIn bro poetry on people here,
Go for it.
but like the tie into marketing certainly is like in marketing in our space, it's like in some ways, marketing, it's very much like a doing a hard thing over a prolonged sense of time. like you have to have that sort of like certain level of grit, because it's like our inbounds are cyclical and our open rates are low, and it just feels like it's getting like harder and harder all the time. um and so I do think that, like, whether it's like running or marketing, there's a certain level of like persistence and tenacity that you have to bring to the table in order to feel successful, or at least successful-ish. And so I think for me, like, running is sort of that thing that I do personally, but it's sort of that sort of personality trait. The reason why I love running, I think, is also the thing that makes me a successful marketer in the healthcare space. So
I love it. I really resonate with that. Like, as you were talking, I was thinking about, like, if you're running a half marathon, the hardest mile is mile 10 because you still have to run 3 more miles.
well,
You're not there yet.
you
You've
get to
done
like
the bulk of
mile
it.
8 and you're like, holy shit, I still have 5 more miles to go. It's like,
It's
yeah,
just it's a slog,
yeah,
and you have to, fuel what fuel is available or is prudent. Um, and you gotta
and
have
also,
the good tools. You gotta just make it.
well, and there's like a lot of preparation that goes involved in that successful thing. And then also there's a certain level of like knowing when to quit. Like, you also
Yeah.
have to be able to like listen to your body, and like if you don't have it that day, it's so discouraging, right? If you're like, man, my Achilles is sore and my knee is killing me and I've got a stitch in my thing and I can't breathe. Like, sometimes you also have to be able to like very much like listen to your body and know that, like, okay, today's not your day. So I just need to like downshift and finish, reset my expectations in that moment. Yeah, so there's a lot of like mindfulness and stuff like that that goes into it as well, on top of just, yeah, that like grit and tenacity of like, oh my god, I still have like 4 more miles to go.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I mean, there's, to your point, there's the uh whether you're trying to win the battle or the war, right? So, like, yeah,
Yeah,
if you're feeling like crap, or like, let's say that you have like a campaign that's like not doing great, you can win the battle. You can just spend all the rest, but you're not going to win the war. You totally have a messed up run. You're going to be out for weeks if
yeah,
you injure your Achilles, or,
yeah,
like a stress fracture in your toes, or any number of things that can go wrong.
totally.
So it's definitely the big picture versus small picture versus how you're feeling in that visceral moment, and knowing what to listen to and what not to. I think it's a very discerning method of applying to many facets in life, honestly.
Yeah,
Um, I I no longer am a runner, but I've definitely felt that specific thing.
yeah,
And I think that the best marketers I know are the ones that make sure their brain gets the blood flow it needs, whether it's lifting weights or yoga or running or
whatever.
whatever
Yeah,
it is. You gotta get that.
totally, totally believe in the mind body connection for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that about yourself. I feel like I know you way better now.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we are at the end, and we're at the point where I say, James, if someone wants to get a hold of you, how should they find you?
Definitely LinkedIn, I think, is probably the easiest. Judging by the amount of cold emails I get, I think my work email is probably not too hard to find. But yeah, I'm always, find me on LinkedIn. I think it's just, James Furbush, and I pretty much connect with everybody. So I'm not very choosy about who I connect with on LinkedIn. Sometimes I do regret it when I get pitch slapped, but if you want to follow me, yeah, LinkedIn's the place to do.
Awesome. And then if you have any questions for me, I'm also on LinkedIn, or you can email me at info@markigy, markigy.com. I'm supposed to say the like, review, subscribe thing, but if you
Hit it
can, please do that. Do it.
down there.
Down there. Thank you.
Always gotta like, subscribe, and follow.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne. Appreciate it.